reaching out. Details emerge about a phone call President Donald Trump held over the weekend with Catholic leaders. Open for business. Several states are set to join Georgia and Oklahoma in allowing stores to loosen coronavirus-related restrictions. Addressing rumors. New details on the alleged health issues facing North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. And an encounter with Christ. Pope Francis has advice on how to avoid temptation and worldly desires. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, April 27th, 2020. Good evening, and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. A member of the White House Coronavirus Task Force says social distancing will continue through the summer. Dr. Deborah Birx worries that some states will try to reopen too soon. The disease has already killed over 55,000 Americans and sickened nearly 1 million as cases worldwide surpass 3 million. Correspondent Owen Jensen reports now remotely. Owen?
Tracy, this past weekend, President Trump spoke with Catholic leaders, watched Mass online, and got an inspirational message. This as the White House tries to vanquish the virus and reboot the economy.
In addition to ramped up testing to win the war on the coronavirus,
a lot of other things we need. We need gowns, we need gloves, we need masks. We need to be ready for the fall.
As for the future,
overall, I think America is going to be strong because of the way we innovate.
It is a battle with so many different fronts. President Trump says he wants to help solve problems facing Catholic schools during the pandemic. He held a call Saturday with over 600 Catholic leaders and educators. The White House released a statement saying the group discussed, quote, the value of Catholic education, the problems facing Catholic schools as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and possible policy solutions. After the call, President Trump tweeted he was going to watch Cardinal Timothy Dolan's Mass on Sunday, and the president encouraged his 78 million Twitter followers to watch too.
I've been advised that our former neighbor up the street is worshiping with us live stream. Welcome, Mr. President.
In his homily, Cardinal Dolan said we're called to pray for our leaders. He also sent a special message to First Lady Melania Trump, who celebrated her 50th birthday on Sunday.
Can I ask you, Mr. President, to assure the First Lady birthday blessings from us? There might be a lot of disagreements in our country, as there is in any vibrant democracy, but boy, do we all agree that we have an exceptionally gracious and effective First Lady.
And finally tonight, for churches and schools and businesses trying to reopen, some new guidelines. Among the recommendations are getting rid of break rooms in offices, having disposable menus in restaurants, and having school kids eat their lunch in their classroom. Tracy?
Okay, thank you, Owen. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reporting tonight. The Small Business Administration is accepting new applications for the Paycheck Protection Program.
But just looking at the first batch of loans that have been submitted by lenders across the country, the average loan size is 50% less, in fact more than 50% less than the average loan size of the first round.
Senator Marco Rubio has pushed for the program. These smaller loans show more smaller businesses and independent workers are being helped. The Small Business Administration says tens of millions of additional workers will benefit from the new funding. Some states are slowly starting up business again. After a few weekend openings, more businesses around the nation are getting back to work this week. Correspondent Mark Irons joins us now with that story. Mark?
Tracy, this comes as some health officials have warned it may be too soon to start reopening America, but restrictions are in place even as some states try to jumpstart the economy.
America attempts to get back on track. This week, Colorado, Minnesota, and Montana plan to ease social distance guidelines and stay-at-home restrictions. Over the weekend, some Georgia businesses were given the green light to reopen.
Gyms, fitness centers, bowling alleys, body art studios, barbers.
The opening of non-essential businesses in Georgia and places like Texas, Alaska, and Michigan come with some restrictions. Chris Penn owns a record store in Texas where retail shops are limited to pickup or delivery.
It's hard to tell how long this is going to go on, and for now I'm happy to serve people safely.
Today in Kentucky, a gradual reopening of some healthcare services, including dentist, physical therapy, and lab services. Governor Andy Beshear wants to reopen the state slowly.
If we don't do this right and we have a second spike, we end up with more economic damage.
The virus continues to shutter business in other parts of the country. Sharif Salem, a restaurant owner in Maryland, says even with carry-out options, his business is struggling.
It's depressing when I come to the restaurant and I see it the way it is right now. You know, you see all these empty seats, you see the dust collecting on the chairs.
And for many states, economic reopening isn't the priority. In Massachusetts, the focus is still on fighting the virus.
We are in what we've referred to as the surge here in Massachusetts.
In Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis believes an economic boom may not come quickly.
If people don't have confidence, then the economy's not going to just take off. That's just not the way it works.
The World Health Organization's emergency chief says the U.S. is well positioned to handle the continuing pandemic and said some states have different strategies because they are at different points in their respective outbreaks. Tracy.
Correspondent Mark Irons reporting for us tonight. Thank you, Mark. Well, amid the easing of restrictions in some states around the country, the race continues to find treatments for COVID-19. At least 70 clinical trials for drug treatments are underway in the U.S. and abroad. Joining me now on Skype from New Hampshire is Dr. Jonathan Ettinger, a cardiologist and fellow of the American College of Cardiology. He is also affiliated with many hospitals in Manchester, including Catholic Medical Center. Dr. Ettinger, welcome back to the show. Good to see you.
Hi, thanks for having me again, Tracy.
I know since you were last on the show, there has been more reports of possible connections between COVID-19 and heart attacks. What can you tell us about that?
Well, when people are coming in critically ill with COVID, we're seeing heart attack mimickers. So what we will sometimes see is a presentation that looks like a heart attack but isn't really that. So we're in a difficult situation at that time do we treat them like a heart attack, or do we treat them for the COVID and see how this quote unquote heart attack plays out? Currently, about 40 to 50% of the presentations with heart attacks and people with COVID aren't what we would think of as the typical heart attack. The heart becomes inflamed because of the virus, and that inflammation creates pain, and it creates changes on the EKG, and it creates a laboratory profile, which, as I mentioned, can mimic the heart attack. So it's quite challenging for the cardiologists who are managing these.
Absolutely. What a challenging time indeed. I know there's also been some new studies that show one of the proposed treatments for COVID-19, which received a lot of attention, hydroxychloroquine, used typically as a malaria treatment, may not be safe from everyone. What do we know about its possible effects on the heart?
So hydroxychloroquine for the heart, we know very little about right now in terms of how it treats we know very little about how it treats COVID. There's a number of clinical trials going on right now that are looking at that. The direct effects of the medication on the heart, however, particularly in combination with another drug, an antibiotic called azithromycin, both of those drugs together can create a change in the EKG, which predisposes you to a life-threatening arrhythmia. So we're cautious about using these drugs just off-label without good data behind them because we could cause more harm than good. So currently, as you mentioned, there are a number of clinical trials going on to look at if these are helpful or harmful or somewhere in between.
We don't have much time left, but I know that at last count, there were a little over 1,800 coronavirus cases in New Hampshire. What are you seeing right now in the hospital?
So right now, we had a plateauing of our admissions and then a slight uptick. I think we're starting to see the slowing. With that came some deaths last week as well. So as the admissions start to fade, we see the death rate rise slightly. The death count rather rise. We think that the curve is flattening, and what people are doing from a social distancing and the masking and just being good citizens during this time, we think that's helping. We haven't seen the surge that we anticipated. We, on the flip side, we're concerned because we haven't seen the number of heart attacks, strokes, and other medical conditions that we typically see as well. So we're worried about people staying at home during the pandemic and suffering through what might be non-COVID related illnesses. So there's two concerns there. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Ettinger, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing your insight, and thank you for all that you do. We really appreciate it. God bless you. Dr. Jonathan Ettinger, thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
Well, amid the coronavirus pandemic, New York has canceled its Democratic presidential primary, which was scheduled for June 23rd. Meanwhile, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi endorsed Joe Biden's presidential bid today. Correspondent Eric Rosales reports.
When the Democratic Congress was passing the Affordable Care Act, Joe Biden was a partner for progress.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, the latest high-profile politician to throw her support behind the presumptive Democratic nominee for president.
As we face coronavirus, Joe has been a voice of reason and resilience, with a clear path to lead us out of this crisis.
The Biden campaign is challenging President Trump to create a, quote, pandemic testing board to oversee a nationwide campaign to provide both diagnostic and antibody tests. President Trump has called for the federal government to improve the availability of COVID-19 testing. Critics of former Vice President Biden point to sexual assault allegations he's currently facing. Tara Reid, a former staffer from the time he was a senator, alleges Joe Biden sexually assaulted her in 1993. The Biden campaign denies the charges. Democrat Stacey Abrams, who unsuccessfully ran to be Georgia's governor in 2018, is looking ahead to Joe Biden's choice of a running mate.
I trust Joe Biden to make the best decision. He's got a smart team around him, and he has no shortage of good candidates to choose from.
And she says support for the Democratic presidential candidate is strong.
I want to make one thing very clear. Joe Biden enjoys the trust of communities of color, and he will take no one for granted.
Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
Coming up, South Korea says it has an update on the health of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. And reaction after an initiative to discuss the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist is postponed for 1 year. Chaos in Yemen as separatists claim control of the important port of Aden. But Saudi Arabia is calling on the separatists to share the port with Yemen, and the European Union agrees with Saudi Arabia.
What Yemen needs right now is peace. It's political process.
The EU is joining Saudi Arabia in condemning the separatists for claiming the port on the Red Sea. The Commission says the move undermines a peace deal with the Saudis and is calling on both the government of Yemen and the separatists to implement the peace agreement. Officials in Japan are expanding a ban on entry to more countries as it tries to slow the spread of the coronavirus. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is announcing that 14 countries will be added to the list. Japan has already banned entry to people from 70 countries. The entry ban and restrictions on travel visas was supposed to end this week, but now they are being extended until the end of May. South Korean officials say they are confident there have not been any unusual developments in North Korea. Rumors swirled last week about the health of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. He's not been seen in public for a couple of weeks, but the government of South Korea is saying unconfirmed reports of Kim's health are not true. Oh, there are more changes in the renovation of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. Today, workers began redesigning the construction site to protect staff from the coronavirus. Work on the cathedral had been halted last month after France imposed strict confinement measures to battle COVID-19. Plans remain in hand in the Paris landmark back to hand the Paris landmark back to the Catholic Church by 2024. Bishops in Italy are criticizing the prime minister for not allowing public masses while lifting a ban on funerals. Giuseppe Conte announced yesterday that some shops and museums can start to reopen May 15th. The Italian Bishops' Conference immediately responded by describing the prime minister's decree as arbitrary for excluding the possibility of celebrating Mass. Pope Francis asked the faithful to remember our first encounter with Christ.
Signore, fa tornare sempre al primo incontro.
At his daily mass at the Vatican, the Holy Father says Christ has called each of us, and we should remember his love for us when we are tempted by worldly things. Pope Francis also prayed for artists who have a great capacity to share beauty with the world, even in the darkest of times. The 52nd International Eucharistic Congress is postponed to September 2021 due to the coronavirus. The event was scheduled to take place this September in Budapest, Hungary. Around 60,000 people registered for the event. This comes right after two other major Vatican events were postponed, the World Meeting of Families and World Youth Day. Marik, project coordinator of the 52nd International Eucharistic Congress, joins us now from Budapest. Welcome to the show. Gergely, can you tell us about the preparations that have been underway since the last Eucharistic Congress took place back in the Philippines in 2016? And also, how does postponing it change the overall organization of the event?
Greeting everyone, and thank you for the question. We have been preparing for this Congress for over 3 years now, and I think it has been a great time for the whole church. And I'm not speaking only about the preparation operationally, but I'm rather speaking about the preparation spiritually. And now that the decision is made that the Congress is postponed for a year, for us as organizing team, it's a new challenge. But I think for all those preparing for a Congress, it's an other year given to be prepared for the Congress spiritually as well.
For those who may not know, can you tell them what the International Eucharistic Congress is and the purpose of it?
Yes, well, we don't have a great deal of time, but I think the main purpose of the International Eucharistic Congress is to celebrate the Eucharist and to reflect on the Eucharist as the center of our life. This is also the motto of the 52nd Eucharistic Congress, all my springs are from you. It means that everything we have is from God, and we want to reflect on the Eucharist. And postponing the event, I think, gives us time to reflect also in our lives on the importance of the Eucharist.
Can you also talk about the theme, All My Springs Are in You? How does that relate to the current crisis?
I think this motto was given almost 4 years ago when it was decided. But I think in these times, in the times of crisis, it's a good step that we reflect on our lives. And as Christians, I believe that it's most important that everything is coming from God, and we are in God's hands, and all our hope, all the graces are from Him, and that it should be really the center of our life. And I think in these times, it's good to reflect, good to make a retreat, and to think about what is really important in our lives. And I think preparation for the Congress and the Congress itself is also giving this opportunity to all of us.
Gergely, before I let you go, I'd like for you to answer this last question for me. How can Catholics deepen their love for the Eucharist, even during these difficult times?
I think even these difficult times give us an opportunity to, as I said, to reflect on ourselves. And I think the good thing is to make a decision already for the better times, for the times after this, and to keep this decision, keep this promise that we make to ourselves that we will be closer to the Eucharist when it's also physically possible. I think now these times when not in all churches it's possible to have the physical Eucharist, there is a great need and a great thirst for this. But we should remember this also after, and we should be really united with the Eucharist when all this is over and our lives go back to normal. And I think this is the message also to be close to Christ in these times and in the times to come as well.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for your insight and all that you do. Gergely Marik, project coordinator of the 52nd International Eucharistic Congress. Thank you again.
Thank you again.
Up next, Pope Francis gives the faithful a foolproof way to overcome disappointment. And battling the pandemic, we'll talk to one of the partners helping to raise money for the CDC Foundation's fight against the coronavirus. Pope Francis says we can face every challenge as long as we ask for help from Christ.
Dal sé al sì, dalla lamentela alla gioia del servizio.
At a Sunday talk at the Vatican's library, the Holy Father said that there are two paths in life. One is being paralyzed by disappointments. The other is to focus on serving others. He said that we must stay away from wondering about the what-ifs in our life, and instead we will find happiness if we start putting others first. Speaking of putting others first, global crowdfunding from charity.com and the nonprofit CDC Foundation are joining forces to raise money in the fight against COVID-19. Donations raised from the partnership will go to support the emergency response to the pandemic. Joining me now on Skype to talk more about this is Rabbi Yehuda Gurwitz, CEO of charity.com. Rabbi, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, first off, for many folks who may not be familiar with it, what is crowdfunding and how exactly does it work?
So crowdfunding means to raise money from the crowd. You can do it, old school would be probably going door to door, mailing. And in the modern age, it's through emails, through any form of raising, but just in a way that you can get a mass message out.
Can you tell us a little bit about the theme of this campaign and why this kind of fundraising is so important to the fight against COVID-19?
So the CDC Foundation is an independent nonprofit created by Congress to help work with the CDC. And within this campaign specifically, they're working on the front lines, working hand in hand with local and public health officials to solve, prevent, detect, and realize anything that's needed to as first responders to solve the crisis.
And how exactly will this money be used to supplement government funding, and what kind of programs will it help?
So specifically, we'll be helping expanding. Again, I do not work for the CDC Foundation, but it will be helping expanding testing, again, prevent, detect, and respond, home essentials for people quarantined, and making sure to deploy emergency people, emergency staff on the front lines and on the local level.
Rabbi, I'd love to ask you this question. How does your faith play a role in the kinds of projects that you choose to support? And did it factor into your decision to take on this partnership?
So absolutely. It's something that the Lubavitcher Rebbe taught us was the sense of responsibility. And just thinking about, it was just the holiday of Purim right in the beginning of this pandemic. And the story of Esther, Queen Esther, and the Jewish people were at risk. And her uncle Mordechai asked her to go beg the king for help. And she was nervous. She said, if I go to the king, I might be killed. So Mordechai tells her, uncle says, Mi odea im la'es kazeh sigat la malchus. Loosely translated, who knows, that maybe just for this very moment that you became the queen. So in times like this, I ask myself, why? Maybe it was just everything we built, the technology and resources that we built was just to help with this. And therefore we basically came in and we changed our fees in order to be able to solve and help and give our resources to be able to solve whatever we can.
That's really wonderful. Quickly, we only have about 30 seconds left, but I'd like to know if people are interested in helping out, how can they do so?
Go to giveforcdcf.org, and it's something amazing that we've seen is so many people who have been answering that question and taking on responsibility, getting their friends involved, getting companies. It didn't make a difference if they're $5 donors or $5 million donors. People have been answering and realizing that they have a sense of responsibility to help out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Rabbi Yehuda Gurwitz, CEO of charity.com. Thanks again.
Thank you.
And before we go, a reminder, EWTN broadcasts Mass throughout the day. Mass airs at 8 a.m., noon, and 7 p.m. Eastern. We're also showing the Pope's daily Mass and other special programming throughout the day. We also have Eucharistic adoration from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. on our website, EWTN.com. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.